Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm an e-learning evangelist here with eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about how you can take inspiration from our library, our template library, and bring those ideas into PowerPoint. So we've got two of our great design team, graphic design, production team people here. We've got Stacey Wilhelmsen, our senior graphic designer, and Thomas Reyes-Cairo, our production manager. We're super stoked to have both of you here today. If you guys have questions during the webinar, we'll be ready to answer those questions in the questions panel, and I'll try to bring those questions up to Stacey and Thomas as we can. If we can't get to all of your questions, we'll try to get those posted either in the email that we'll send out later today or in the recap later in the week. Actually, it's Thursday, so probably early next week. Also, just so you know, one of the things we like to do after the webinar is try to follow up as soon as possible. Sometimes it's just to get feedback. Most of the time we would like to touch base and see if anybody needs clarification on the webinar topic after the fact. Also, we're going to be giving everyone attending a free eLearning Brothers account if you don't already have one. So you can be looking forward to that in your email. All right, so without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and pass this over to you, Thomas. Let me know if you received that.
All right. Show my screen. Hopefully everybody's able to see what's going on there.
Yep, looks great.
Fantastic. Let me just go ahead and get this ready. All right, so as Andrew said, we want to talk a little bit about PowerPoint and how amazing PowerPoint is and some of the really cool things that you can do with it. The entire idea behind the webinar and kind of what inspired us to do this was we've been working on a project where we're trying to take some of our templates from like Articulate Storyline or Lectora or Camtasia and convert them into PowerPoint. And as we were going through this project, we discovered that PowerPoint's actually still a really, really great tool for doing some really amazing things. And so we just wanted to show off a couple of those things for you folks just to maybe help inspire you and show that PowerPoint can be fun, which is, I think, a thing that people are starting to think isn't possible anymore. A lot of times when people are working with PowerPoint presentations, they tend to think, oh, this is just boring, click next kinds of material, which is, you know, no fun. But it really can be a ton of fun. And one of the ways that that we can do this is by using some of, well, we'll get into that a little bit, using one of the transitions. And so I want to actually start by looking at a Camtasia template that we have. It was kind of our inspiration for it. This is our Daydream Camtasia intro template. There are actually two kind of templates within this Camtasia template, but it's something that when we saw it, we thought, hey, maybe we can do something like this with PowerPoint. So what you'll kind of see is it kind of has this this panning, a little bit of movement to it, some rotation, those kinds of things that go along with it. There are two different intros that are in there. Again, we'll go ahead and watch it just one more time. I don't know how well it's showing. Sometimes the videos aren't always as great, but we just looked at this and said, man, this would be like a really cool visual way to just kind of introduce people to a new section in a presentation. This is very eye-catching, and we just wanted to know whether or not we could duplicate something like this in PowerPoint. And the answer is yes. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start with kind of a basic example that shows how you can kind of mess around with some of these things, and also introduce you maybe to the coolness that is the morph transition. If you're not familiar with it, hopefully you will start using it a lot more in any PowerPoint presentations that you have. In addition to that, we also wanted to talk a little bit about one of the cool features that you can get in PowerPoint for the PC, which is that it actually accepts 3D model files from other programs. And while we were kind of searching and looking around, we actually found out that NASA has a ton of these 3D models just freely available to the public. And so we kind of went a little crazy clicking through and trying to find a few. And so that's where we're going to start here. I'm going to show you what it is that we're going to see happen and then how to actually make it. So oops, let's click on transitions here. You can kind of see there's this like rotation effect. So you can kind of get a little bit of a parallax, but also kind of some object rotation. And that's just something that kind of happens when you just naturally kind of go for the transition. So you can kind of do this fun thing with 3D objects. I'm going to zoom out a little bit just to kind of show what that looks like. And I think maybe we'll just go ahead and go to a new slide, and I'll show you on this new slide kind of how you can work with some of this stuff. Just delete a few of these extra pieces. Maybe we'll just get the 3D object in. So if you go to Insert 3D Models, you can do it from a file. And as long as you have one of the compatible file types, so for instance, NASA had a few Filmbox files, some of these stereolithography format files, and also some of these object files available just to freely download. So that way you could insert them into your PowerPoint if you wanted. I'm going to go ahead and fetch a few of these and throw them in and show you how you can kind of manipulate them. Daydream assets. So this is the one for the International Space Station. You can see it in there, and you can scale it and just start playing with it if you wanted to. Go ahead and get rid of that title bar now. I've got something else there on the file. And you'll see that it's got this little box where you can basically just start to rotate it, to take a look at it. And this is what helps us to kind of have a little bit of this effect, right? Is we'll start it in one position and then we'll kind of move it into another one. Any 3D object, and actually really any object within PowerPoint, gives you, oops, that was a format background. Let's go format 3D model. Will give you these model rotation presets where you can kind of tell it where it is that you want to start. It's got some buttons to click, so that way if you just kind of want to quickly go to a position, you can rotate it however you like, et cetera, and just kind of getting it with those. Or if you know exactly what degrees you want to set it at, you can just tell it, and then it's good to go. So we'll go ahead and reset it. So what you can kind of see over here is we started it with a rotation in one direction and are going to try to move it into another one. So you can either just click and drag it to where you want it to start. We'll say that's pretty good. And then I want to also stick in my little spaceman. We'll go back a folder and insert him in.
Now a question has come up.
Sure.
Is this PC only, or is it also for the Mac? And do you have to be on the newest version of PowerPoint for this to work?
I don't know if you have to be on the newest PowerPoint version for this to work. I believe they've had some of this 3D rotation stuff in earlier. But I am on the latest version, so I know that it works in that particular one. But as far as older versions, I don't know if they accept the 3D models the same, but they should at least be able to do some of this object rotation stuff, which is important because if you're on a Mac, those are the features that you get. You don't get the 3D modeling stuff. So if you want to insert some of these 3D files, you'd have to do that on a PC. And then if you send the file over to a Mac, which is something that actually Stacey and I had done as we were kind of preparing for this a little bit, what it will do is it will basically just flatten the image wherever it was at in its rotation, and then just kind of transfer that over. So it doesn't work as far as the 3D model goes, but you can still do some of the rotation stuff, and I'll show you how that's actually pertinent when we get to go back to Daydream as far as rebuilding that, because that one actually uses a lot of flat imagery.
Excellent. The one other question on that.
Sure.
Are there certain 3D file types that are or aren't allowed?
Yes, yeah. So if you look in it again, it'll tell you exactly which ones you can go for. So it has Filmbox format, object format, 3D manufacturing format, polygon format, stereolithography, and then binary GL transmission. So these are all of the different file types that it accepts. There are a couple of other ones that are out there and available that it doesn't support. So things like Blender, what is it, 3ds, I don't think it actually accepts as well. So there are a couple of 3D modeling things that it doesn't, but there are plenty of even just like free resources out there that that do come in these formats. They're still very common formats that you'll find out in the wild as you're looking around at 3D objects, but it doesn't accept everything. It is a selected list of things that it'll accept. Okay, so now we've got our spaceman. I just kind of want to rotate him a little bit, and I'm going to come over here and see if maybe I can get, we'll go the other way. We'll kind of start him this way. And then I want to insert a picture background here for us. Let's go back to documents. Let's go to Daydream. And there's our picture of the Earth. So when we insert this, it's going to be smaller, and in order for it to kind of get that parallaxing effect, you do need to make it bigger than the actual slide is going to be, because otherwise you'll get that white part of the background in there. So we'll just make it a touch bigger. And in this instance, we'll stick this first slide off to the right a little bit, send it to the back, and here we are. So this is stage one. We've got it where we're set up. In order to get the morph transition to work, you need to set up a secondary slide that has all of the same objects on it, or it doesn't have to have all of them, but if you don't, then when it transitions, anything that wasn't there will just disappear, and anything that's new that gets added to the slide will just kind of appear. That's kind of how it interprets that. But if you set it up with all of the same exact objects, which I'm just going to do by duplicating the slide, then it will actually do some movement with it. So now we're on the second slide. And let's start messing with some of the rotation. First, I'm actually going to take the background. We're going to adjust it to go to the left a little bit. And now we just start clicking. Let's rotate him around this way. Let's get maybe a little bit of a rotation. Oh, that's sideways. Let's try maybe, I don't know. It's kind of weird because once you start rotating an object, yeah, there we go. We'll get him like that. Oops.
Where's that format?
Yeah, so
file? How are you able to pull up that menu?
Yeah, so that is basically just the format shape. So you can get to it a lot of different ways. You can right click, format 3D model. It's the same thing if you were to click on a picture and format picture. And then once you're in that format window, there are a lot of different options. You can have fills, you know, the rotation is here, etc. And so it's just within the format window. If you wanted to, you could come in here. I believe under one of these drop downs, there's the option to basically get into this, but I usually just end up right clicking into it. And then once I've got the pane open, it just stays open as I kind of click around to some other things. But you're looking basically for this 3D rotation option that's available either here. This is a little bit different since I'm on the model. It's got its own, since it knows it's a 3D model, it's got its own model rotation options here that you can mess with too. So we're going to move him so that way he comes over this way. And we'll grab the ISS, make it so that way it starts to rotate that way. And now that we've got everything kind of layered nicely, what you just need to do is add the morph transition to it. And once you've added it, you can kind of see that it does that. It automatically will go from where it was previously and account for the rotations. It'll account for any movement that you do. And it's very, very simple. This is only 3 objects though, and so when you get into something like the Daydream template, it can get a little bit more complicated. So this is the Camtasia template that we were looking at a little bit earlier. What I'm going to do is bring up the selection pane, just so that way you can see how many objects we're dealing with here. It's probably close to about 25 to 30 different objects that we've got on the screen at any given time. And that can seem super intimidating, but it's really not, and I want to show you how. So with the selection pane especially, it's very easy for you to select an object and you can kind of click through until you find it, or you can just click out on to the actual template itself. I'm going to zoom out so you can kind of see the whole thing here, and just select an individual object. And you'll see again in that format picture pane under the 3D rotation, we've got an X and a Y rotation to the object. And we do just kind of the same thing. So when you come to another slide with all of those same objects on it and you select one of them, you'll see again it's got an X and a Y rotation telling it where it's going to go, and you can also kind of change its XY position on the slide so that way it can also maybe move left to right. And the effect that you end up getting, I'm going to actually drag this one up and then I'll talk about why I've got 3 of them there in a second. But the effect you end up getting, let me move GoToWebinar out of the way so that way I can actually click this. When you go to a slideshow, you'll start to see it do that whole full movement, kind of like what we saw in the Camtasia template, and it's super cool. And it's all just from kind of position and rotation changes. And you saw kind of like the double movement there. That's something that you can kind of chain if you need to. And it's really easy, especially if you're already working from one of our templates. So here I have the Daydream template pulled up in Camtasia, and you can see that we just basically pulled all of the little bits and pieces out of it and kind of stuck them into their appropriate positions. But if you're wondering, like, man, what do I rotate it at? Camtasia tells you all of that information. but you have to be a little bit careful. So here I've kind of broken it out so that way I could select the text box that's there. And over here, you'll see I have those same things, the X, Y, and the Z rotation. But this is a little bit different than what PowerPoint has. When you look at PowerPoint, if I select one of these, this took me a little bit to figure out because it was kind of confusing. The X, Y, and Z don't all equate to the same thing. So you really have to look at the pictures and kind of see, okay, how is this like rotating around a particular point? And then match that with what Camtasia is telling you. And what I actually found out is that the numbers in Camtasia, the X and the Y are flipped. So X is Y, Y is X. And one of them goes from negative to positive. So if I start out on slide 1, you'll see over here, kind of this beginning position, we have a 20 degree and a negative 10 degree on the Y and the X. Whereas on slide 1 here, if I select an object, I have a 20 degree X instead of Y and a 10 degree instead of negative 10 degree Y. And it's just one of those things where like, it took a little bit to kind of figure out what it was talking about, but once I kind of looked at the pictures that it has there explaining like, oh, this is the way that it rotates. And I also did some clicking around to kind of make sure that it was like actually, you know, tilting and turning the way that I expected it to, then I could kind of translate those numbers over. But it still gives you that information as a good starting point if you wanted to be able to mimic something that you see happening in our template. From there, it's just as easy as you can select an object and then just Control A to select everything, and you'll see it in the selection pane, everything over here selected. You don't want to rotate everything like your background, so you can deselect those with just a simple control click. But now I have all of the other objects, and then I can just tell it I want it to be a 20 degree X and a 10 degree Y, and then that'll shift everything exactly the way that I want it to be. And then I do the same thing, I duplicate the slide over, and then I can, again, just kind of select everything and tell it what position that it needs to be in. So if I wanted to, I could go over to Camtasia, kind of see where everything's at later on in the rotation, after all is said and done. Now it's telling me that negative 20, which actually goes over to X, and negative 20 is really more like 340 degrees when you're kind of doing like a circular spinning. So you just kind of have to do a little bit of that because it doesn't allow negative numbers. So I just tell everything I want it at 340 and we're good to go. And stick in the morph transition. I can preview it if I want. And I can see how all of it shifts. And so you can kind of see some of those pieces moving a little bit from left to right. And that's, again, you just kind of drag it to the appropriate place wherever it kind of feels right. But you can kind of see how this concept is where you can kind of take it and do something like that. Now, if we wanted to do something that was like completely exactly like the Camtasia template, Camtasia is a little bit more robust in how it handles this, in that that particular template, it kind of does a rotation to one place and then it kind of does like a hard turn and does another one. Whereas what Microsoft PowerPoint wants to do is just take you from here all the way to that ending point. And so if you needed to, you could stick in kind of like a middle pathway point, which is why I have this third slide here. But the downside to that is you'll get a little bit of easing on the animation where it'll kind of like go and then slow down and stop, and then it'll go onto the next animation. But you can still kind of program that with a little bit of like telling the animation to immediately advance to the next slide with, you know, no waiting in between. You can kind of change the duration for how long that's going to take. But then the effect that you get in the end is actually, you know, pretty neat and very cool. Something I think kind of unusual for PowerPoint. So on click here, just automatically advance it here, and so you can kind of see it rotating around and getting some of that really neat movement with those two morph animations on the slide. So that's how you do it. Now, the question might be, why do you want to do it? And I think the answer is very simple. I think what the goal is to try to create something that's visually engaging. A lot of times with those like click next for the next block of information, listening to somebody kind of yammer for a little while, that's not, you know, very engaging. But sometimes when you have these movement and visuals that are coming along with it, it's the whole idea of why animations are good in the first place. You can kind of still maybe capture some of that attention, bring it back into your content, and just kind of wow people. When people get wowed by something that they haven't really ever seen very often, it's going to make them pay attention. Like, when's the next thing that's going to wow me going to show up? You know, that kind of a thing. And it can be really, really helpful to what it is that you're doing. And while this is, I think, probably something that's maybe a little bit run of the mill or normal for people who are used to working in Storyline or Captivate or Lectora. This is not a common thing in PowerPoint, and I think that's the point to make with something like this. So if you work a lot with instructor-led training, working a lot with making PowerPoint presentations, this is the kind of thing that can really up your game, make you look a lot more like a rock star.
There's a question that has come up a few times.
Sure.
To which slide are you applying the morph to? Is it the first or the second slide? Where do you go into make
second
adjustments?
one? Yeah. So basically, what the morph transition is doing is it's telling you set it on the second slide with it basically saying, okay, you remember what was on the last slide? I want you to take that and come to this slide with that. So you're transitioning in with the morph transition, because if you stick it on the first one, it's going to basically, I can show you actually, what will happen is it will just fade it in because it had nothing there beforehand, right? So if you do that, or if I were to say morph from this other slide, when you do that, it's basically going to fade the one out and then fade the other in. And so it's always going to try to take what it was from the last slide and bring it into the second slide. So yeah, it's very, very important to make sure that that you stick it on that second or third or whatever, however many slides you're planning on kind of chaining together. So that way you get, okay, here's the previous slide going to the current slide.
We have more questions, but let's move on and we'll grab these questions at the end. I want to make sure we give Stacey plenty of time.
Sure thing. Yeah, so Stacey's got another really great way that can help to grab learners' attention, and I think it's going to be awesome. So do I need to give up my screen, or are you stealing it from me?
Nope, we'll pass it over to Stacey.
Fantastic.
All right, we're seeing your screen.
Perfect. Hey, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to talk about click and reveals, and this is, something that's pretty well known. Sometimes it's seen as kind of lowbrow for a lot of the traditional tools that we use. Simple click and reveals are just kind of, a dime a dozen. But when we're talking about PowerPoint, it's a whole new way to really engage with your learners instead of just click next, click next, click next. So for my inspiration, we've got this one here. Let me play this. This is a pretty simple click to reveal with an overlay that goes back to the main page every single time. Now this is just an image of an engine, just pointing out each individual piece. So using that for my inspiration and for my love of space as well, thanks to Thomas, I was able to get a flattened image of the ISS as well. So kind of taking that, I was able to build this as a click and reveal, and this would mainly be for, if you're trying to engage with your learners and say, okay, can you identify these parts so that you've got more back and forth, or, as a knowledge check. So let me go ahead and go into the slideshow portion so you can kind of see what's going on here. We've got some, fun little subtle animations going on, but the main thing is being able to click on each of these. As you can see, when you hover over these buttons, the mouse changes, so you know that they're clickable. So when you click on this one, we've got a separate pop-up that kind of talks more about this piece. And similar to the example seen, we've got a close button up here too that is a button that takes us back to that main screen. Simple as that. And each one is different. So in order, let me get out of there. To build this, all I did was I set up a couple of master slides, and master slides, I feel like people are a little bit nervous to use them a lot of times, and I think it is one of the most helpful things that I've ever used in PowerPoint, because you can set a bunch of this stuff up and then it locks itself into place when you're adding stuff on in the main slide view. So you don't have to worry about shifting stuff over and then it not lining up, which is always a design nightmare. So all I really did was pick a background image. I created all these shapes in PowerPoint. I just kind of played around with the transparency of all these shapes. It's pretty simple and straightforward as far as that. And then my little PNG of the space station. But for all of the content slides, I set up a separate one that's just a basic layout with you know, a master title and then a content box and then a little space to put each of my separate photos for the section of the ISS. And this has the same main background here, so it kind of feels more like a pop-up than just a separate slide. Okay, so backing back out of that. From here, once I had this set up, I just applied that first layout to my home slide. And then I created an individual slide for each of the pieces that I wanted. So the number of slides here directly correlates with the number of buttons I've got set up here. And it's kind of important to plan ahead with that. So know exactly how many slides you need. I mean, you don't necessarily need to like have all the content in there, but at least lay it out so you know exactly how many buttons you need and you're not trying to go back and forth. So to create buttons, it's kind of hiding over here in the shape format dropdown. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom, we've got action buttons and we've got, you know, next slide, back a slide, home, you name it. There's a bunch. The one we want is actually the blank one here at the end. It's called custom. And if you click on that, it gives you your normal little shape cursor and you can make, you know, whatever size button you want. It doesn't matter. As soon as you release, it'll give you this little pop-up window. Default is always set to none, but that's because we actually want it to go somewhere. We want it to hyperlink. And then instead of just going to the next slide, we want to choose which slide it goes to. So we want to go all the way down to slide ... and it will open up another pop-up window for us, and it will label each of the slides we've got set up so far. So from here, I can just say, okay, this will need to link to this page. Hit OK. You see it labels it right there for us. You can also add sounds if you want and run programs, but I feel like that's a little too complicated for this. So we're just going to leave it as is and hit OK. And the cool thing from here is now you can format the button however you want. You can change the fill, the outline, whatever you want. And the really fun part about it is if you go to your shape format, this fun little shape right here, you can actually go in and change the shape from here. So you can make it an arrow, you can make it whatever you want. There's some really fun stuff and you can still play with it from here just like you would a normal shape, but it's got that hyperlink information in there. One kind of critical thing I learned as I was doing this is if you want any copy on that button, it is best to type it on top of the button directly. So we'll just say number 13. Let's change that so we can actually read it. The problem with this is if you're trying to use these as pointers as well, kind of like I have here, you cannot, at least I have not discovered how to change or alter the shape without actually altering the copy within it as well. So for example, like if we click on this little guy here and we try and type into it, because it's been rotated, you end up with a very skittywampus looking question mark. So instead of making those the buttons, I made separate buttons here. And the reason for that is because if you try and add a text box on top of a shape that is a button, that text box will actually block out part of that button and you won't get that hover state, and it can lead to you accidentally clicking through your PowerPoint, you know, next slide, next slide, next slide, instead of actually going to the slide you want to. So this is kind of how I decided to handle that. The pointers are separate shapes than the buttons themselves. Yes.
So we do have a quick question that has come up on that. Sure. Will the buttons work if your PowerPoint is published to PDF and placed onto a server?
You know what? We have not tried that yet.
Yeah, and I would be fairly certain to say that it probably doesn't. I would imagine it probably strips out a lot of that hyperlinking functionality, but I don't know for certain. Maybe I'll try to run that in the background while you're still doing that and see how that goes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So it's really important to get all of the buttons on like your home slide set up correctly and making sure that they are linking to the correct slide. And one of the fastest ways to test that is actually to right click, and you should have a hyperlink option that shows up, and you can either open the hyperlink or edit the hyperlink. So say you notice you're clicking through and it's not going to the correct slide, you can just quickly go in and change which slide it's going to. Just go back up to slide ... and go from there. Okay, and so when setting up all of these other pop-up slides, there we go. It was the same process for this button. To start, I actually, where'd my shapes go? I just created a square button and then told it to hyperlink. And I want to go back to slide 1. Okay. And clicked OK. And then from here, I went in and altered the shape of that button. And we have this fun little option right here. I used the times button, but hey, it works, right? So now we've got a pretty closely shaped X, and from here you can still alter, you can make it as, you know, thin or chunky as you want, and you have a close button. But the cool thing about these buttons is you can actually copy them from slide to slide and they will retain their hyperlink information. So for all of these slides that have a similar layout, all I did was copy and paste this little close or hyperlink button onto every single one of these little slides all the way through. So I didn't have to create a new button every single time. Okay, the other way to add a little bit of pizzazz that's kind of subtle are just in some animations. So let's go back into the slide master. So I ended up putting all my slide animations or animations in here. Okay, so for the background image, I have it set to a grow shrink animation, and to have it be as subtle as I wanted it, I only had it expand to 150%. I set a smooth start and end. I also did an auto reverse, so once it gets to its 150%, it actually starts reversing, which doubles the time of the animation, and it kind of helps that transition as well. I have it set to with previous, so as soon as you start in presentation mode, it automatically starts that animations for you. And I set it to about 25 seconds, nice and slow. And then all these little guys, I did an animation in on all of them, and then on the hexagons, I added a spin here and there, clockwise, counterclockwise. But again, because I didn't want them to be too in your face, I set most of them to 15 to 25 seconds. And the result turns out kind of nice. Okay, we'll just do that one more time. Yeah, so we've got them all kind of spinning at different rates.
So a question has come up about
Yes.
those octagons. How did you get them to rotate for what appears to be forever, never stopping?
Well, they're not quite forever. We'll just open it to animation pane here again. Okay, so we'll just take a look at this guy real quick. Adding in a smooth start and smooth end automatically kind of adds a little bit of time onto the animation. And it's not so herky-jerky, so it's kind of nice and smooth, especially when you're adding it on top of like a fly-in animation. So, and all of these animations are set to with previous. So as soon as they're done with their first animation, they automatically move into their second. But each one of these has at least 15 seconds. This little guy's 15 seconds, 20 seconds. And I just kind of randomly went through on some of the hexagons and added a short delay, so they don't all necessarily start at the same time, and it kind of staggers them nicely. But the duration's really only 25 seconds, but with everything else going on, it kind of feels longer when you kind of start stacking animations like that. And they are at, I believe all of them are at a full 360 rotation, which helps with the length of time as well. Anything else on that?
Nothing more on the rotations. Do you want to take more questions now, or because we can hold off for a few more minutes if you've got?
I've got one more fun thing to show, and then we can take more questions after that. Okay. So if you don't really want to take the time to build all these animations out, there is a fun little thing you can do in Mac, and we did try and find this in or on a PC, but we weren't actually able to locate it. I don't think it's a thing yet, but it was a new feature as of 2016 for Mac. You can actually take an image. This is just that same image we placed in before. I got rid of the other animations from this particular one. And you actually have an option all the way over here to the right. It says animate as background. And if you click on that, it brings up a second window with that image. And you can actually just click points on your image, and it will automatically do a slow zoom in and out. And it doesn't go from like 0.1 to 0.2, it does a full zoom, 0.1, zoom out, and then goes to 0.2 in and then back out. So this is really nice if you don't want to bother with any other animations, but you still want something a little more engaging than just a flat picture in the back. And it can be really nice, especially if you know you're going to be spending a lot of time talking about information on a single slide. You can have something going on in the background. You can also do it like if you've got a lot of like graphs or dashboard information sitting on top of it, that subtle movement in the background is kind of nice. So we're going to go ahead and hit apply, and then I'll show you kind of what this looks like by itself. And this is, oh, it's playing from the first slide again. Let me get out of Slide Master. Oopsie daisy. Try that again. Okay. Okay, so it does take a really long time to start moving, but once it does, you can kind of see what's happening.
And this looks really choppy, but that's only because of GoToWebinar. I'm sure it looks super sleek. And
it is, it's super smooth. So if you feel like you're not really animation savvy and you just don't have time or you don't want to deal with it, this is a really fun alternative. You can just click some points on your background image and it will automatically take care of it for you. It's really nice. But unfortunately, it's only a Mac option, at least for right now.
All right, so I'm actually going to pop in here to ask you a bunch of questions.
Sure.
I'm going to take off these headphones. Okay, so talking about master slides and putting cool things on the master slide to make it move around, could you put the close button on the master slide, or does that need to be individualized?
Yes, no, the buttons can live on the master slides if you want them to. They don't necessarily need to. It just depends on whether or not, I mean, if you're going to be changing a bunch of stuff around or maybe passing this file off to somebody else who's going to be altering it a lot, and they may not be as savvy with master slides, that might cause a little bit of confusion because, you know, you can't click on that when you're in your regular slide view. But as long as you're in presentation mode, it works the same.
Okay, excellent.
If I can add.
Sure.
Throw this on, but I'm going to be like leaning over.
I tightened this microphone too much.
So again, with master slides and sticking hyperlinks on master slides, you do have to be a little bit careful with doing something like that, because the point of a master slide is that you can essentially stick a formatted something onto a page. And so when you stick something like a close button with a hyperlink on a master slide, that means that that close button is always going to try to go to the same place, which you may not want for a close button. So it just, yeah, it just kind of depends. You have to be a little bit careful with the hyperlinks going onto master slides. What you could do is you could just, no, I wouldn't. You should either stick it on the master because you know that that button is always going to go to the same location or to the same slide, or you should remove it from the master slide and kind of stick it on there individually, so that way you can customize it per time you're going to end up using it. So you can do it, but just know that it might not always act the way that you want to if you do end up doing that.
Yeah,
that's a good rule of thumb. Another question here is, if you created that cool feature in a Mac and then had to, say you're creating it for someone else and they're going to play it and they play it on a PC, is that going to work?
It will still play, you just cannot edit it. And that's another interesting point that reminds me. If we were to look at this slide, let's go back into the master real quick. If we actually pull up the animations pane on it, you'll see that nothing appears in the animations pane. You can actually see the little points at which it's animating to and through for those 2 points that I clicked on, but you can't necessarily edit it like you would a normal animation. It's just kind of set and it's there, and
sure,
you're done.
There's the same kind of question with the morph transition. If it's only available in 365, and you create it and then you give it to someone else that's going to be presenting it, do they have to have 365 for morph to work?
Yes, and that kind of is a general rule of thumb with a lot of software features. Generally speaking, whenever there's a new feature for a newer piece of software, almost always you can't actually even open it in an older piece of software, just because it's newer. And so there's a lot of like you can always bring older stuff forward, but you can't always bring newer stuff backward. And so you're gonna run into some of that problem. And I think that definitely goes for something like a morph transition. I think if somebody were to attempt to open it, if it did open in the first place, it would probably throw an error or try to replace it with something else, or do anyway. It wouldn't work out very well. So you're probably going to have to end up making sure that they do have the morph transition in their software.
Now I'm going to go ahead and pass the screen back to you, Thomas, to answer that PDF question, because that was a good question. So let's see.
Show my screen. Let me hide some stuff real quick because I can't see anything. Put that over there. Okay, so yes, a question came in about, there were 2 questions that actually came in that I kind of was testing in the background here. The first one that we'll talk about is this idea of, if I make this into a PDF, what's going to happen? So I did that. I just made a really quick thing with a couple of buttons that are going to jump to some other places. And then I was actually testing another something in here too, so it doesn't look exactly the same. But this is a PDF. It's in Acrobat Reader right now, and you'll see I can click on it. I can go to other pages do stuff. So it does retain the hyperlink within it to the other pages. So cool, it does work. And you can kind of do some fun things with the PDFs. Now, as far as hosting it on the server, I know that was the second part of the question. I didn't have a server that I could quickly host it onto to determine what would happen if I did that. But step one complete, and it seems like it's working okay. So I would imagine that it's probably fine, but definitely test it out yourself, knowing that at least the PDF part of it works just fine. Second question that came up was, what happens if you try to stick something with all of these crazy 3D objects and morph transitions into Articulate? And the answer was nothing. It gives you an error. It threw me an error and said, hey, go check this area out to see why. And I'm pretty sure that that area probably wouldn't tell me what went wrong, but I'm pretty sure it has to do with the fact that it's using a morph transition and 3D objects, and Storyline just doesn't know what to do with it yet. So I gave it a shot, and the presentation would not load when I tried to import it. So we have all sorts of other amazing Storyline templates that you can use that hopefully will kind of get you there too. But yeah, sadly, you can't take the PowerPoint into Storyline.
So what I'm going to do, because we have what appears to be endless questions, as well as not enough time to really dig into most of these. A lot of these talk about compatibility and things like that. So I'm just going to make sure that we have those captured and that we can get to those later. And I'm going to take the screen back for just a moment here. Right there. I think. Is that looking good? Okay, excellent. I think. I can't see it. My screen is too crowded. There we go. Okay, so Thomas mentioned we have awesome Storyline templates if you have a hard time trying to convert a PowerPoint back into Storyline. But the main thing we wanted to make sure that we got across in this webinar was that you may see as you're digging through our template library, if you have an ELB master pack, master suite, and you're going through our library and you're like, oh, I love this template, but it's not in the tool I need. I can't find that in PowerPoint, or I can't find it in Camtasia, or wherever. It is possible 9 times out of 10 to convert this very nicely into what you need it to be, into the software that you need. So this was a great example of how to convert a Camtasia template into a PowerPoint template, or to just use the tools to make your PowerPoint just as cool as your Storyline or your Lectora or your Captivate project can be, with just a little bit of know-how. We'd love for you to schedule a free demo. If you don't already have access to all these templates, come and check them out. We'd love to chat with you. You can give a phone call, give us a call, 801-796-2767, send an email to info@elearningbrothers.com, or just go to elearningbrothers.com as well. There's tons of great stuff there. Any wrap-up thoughts you have?
Yeah, so as kind of like a part of the Steve Jobs style, one last thing. I mentioned at the beginning of this kind of came from a project that we were working on internally here to determine if we could take some of our cool templates that we have and kind of convert them over to PowerPoint. And while you might not see these particular templates directly showing up in our library in the near future, we have been working a lot lately on taking some of our really awesome style templates, which you may or may not know about, that we do have for Lectora and Storyline and for Captivate, and converting some of those into PowerPoint templates. And so that we don't have anything to show you today as far as that goes, but it's coming very soon. So that way you can have some continuity between maybe some of the things that you're doing with templates in our library in an e-learning authoring tool, and then also bring some of that into PowerPoint as well. And we think it's really cool. We learned a lot while we were kind of doing this. I think some of them are even some of these kind of hyperlinks interaction style templates. So you can still do some of this fun stuff.
There's a couple in there.
Yeah, there's a few. And so we'll be bringing the really kind of fresh designs that we have with our style templates to PowerPoint and some of these really cool things. So definitely look for that in the future.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Stacey and Thomas, for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll try to get these questions answered as soon as possible and out to you guys. Thanks.
Bye.